In the grand ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, chandeliers cast a golden glow over the elegant crowd. The air was thick with the scent of roses and champagne as quiet murmurs of high society chatter filled the room. Everything was perfect, exactly as Emma had imagined her engagement party would be. She stood near the center of the room, fingers lightly clutching a glass of sparkling wine, her heart beating faster with excitement. Tonight, in front of everyone, she and Jackson would finally announce their engagement. Her fiancé was running late, but that wasn't unusual. Jackson was a busy man, a rising star in the business world, ambitious and sharp, but he always showed up for her. Always. Emma adjusted the delicate lace on her pale blue dress, stealing a glance at her parents, who were engaged in polite conversation with influential guests. They had pushed for this engagement, ensuring Jackson was the right match for their family's legacy. She sighed, taking another sip of champagne. Where is he? The doors to the ballroom suddenly swung open. All eyes turned, and in walked Jackson, out alone, but hand in hand with another woman. Emma's heart stopped. Whispers rippled through the crowd. A waiter froze mid-pour, champagne spilling onto the tablecloth. Cameras from the invited press captured the scandal unfolding. Emma couldn't move. Victoria Beneff, daughter of one of Jackson's most important business partners, stood, stunning in a sleek red gown that clung to her like a second skin, her lips curved into a smirk. And Jackson, he looked completely unbothered, still holding Victoria's hand. Emma forced herself to speak, her voice barely a whisper over the tension filling the room. Jackson. He stopped a few feet away, looked her dead in the eyes, and with chilling indifference said, "Emma, I can't marry you." The words hit her like a slap. The entire room fell silent. Emma's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" Jackson exhaled as if this was nothing more than a slight inconvenience. "Let's be honest, Emma. You have nothing to offer me." Her stomach twisted. "I don't understand. You proposed to me." Jackson's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Did I? Or was it just a conversation our families arranged?" Her vision blurred. "I needed the leverage of your family's name," he continued coldly. "But now I have better options." Victoria chuckled softly, squeezing Jackson's arm. "He means me." Emma felt sick. "This is a joke, right?" she whispered, her voice breaking. Jackson's eyes hardened. "I never loved you, Emma," he said, his voice sharp and cutting. "You were just a stepping stone, and now I don't need you anymore." A sharp gasp broke through the room. Someone dropped a glass. Emma's hands trembled as she stared at him, trying to find any sign that this wasn't real, that this wasn't happening. But Jackson just smirked. Victoria tilted her head, Fox sympathy dripping from her voice. "You're a sweet girl, Emma, but let's be real, you don't belong in Jackson's world. You never did." Emma's entire body went cold. 100 pairs of eyes were on her, watching, waiting to see how she would crumble. She could feel the whispers, "Poor girl, so embarrassing. Did she really think he loved her?" Her mother's voice cut through the suffocating silence. "Emma." She turned slowly, hoping just this once that her mother would defend her. But the look on her mother's face wasn't concern, it was disgust. "You have humiliated us," her mother said, her voice low and sharp as a blade. Emma's mouth parted. "I didn't. If you can't secure a husband with wealth and power," her mother continued coldly, "then you are no longer a daughter of mine." The final blow. Emma staggered back as her mother turned away, leaving her alone in a room full of people. Her entire world had just shattered. The streets of Manhattan were unforgiving at night, especially when walking alone in an evening gown that no longer felt like it belonged to you. Emma's heels clicked against the pavement, the sound sharp and relentless. Her feet ached, the delicate shoes digging into her skin, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop, not when every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear Jackson's voice. Cold and final. "I never loved you." Her mother's voice wasn't far behind, slicing through her already broken heart. "You are no longer a daughter of mine." A shaky breath escaped her lips as she stumbled forward, the crisp night air burning her lungs. The diamond engagement ring that had once sat proudly on her finger was gone, left abandoned on the marble floor of the ballroom. She had nothing now, no fiancé, no family, no future. She didn't know how long she wandered, but eventually the warm glow of a small, dimly lit bar pulled her in. It wasn't the kind of place she normally would have set foot into. Old, too quiet, too unfamiliar, but right now, she didn't care. She just needed a drink. The bartender barely glanced at her as she slid onto a worn stool, her dress out of place against the peeling wood and flickering neon lights. "Whiskey," she muttered. "Nate." The bartender raised an eyebrow but said nothing, pouring her a glass before stepping away. Emma downed the first sip, wincing as the burn seared down her throat. "Good." She wanted it to hurt. "You don't seem like the whiskey type," a voice mouthed deep, edged with curiosity observed. Emma turned her head and found herself looking at a man sitting a few stools away. He was not the kind of man she was used to. No tailored suit, no designer watch. Instead, he wore a plain dark jacket over a simple gray t-shirt. His hair was slightly tousled, as if he didn't bother to keep it perfectly styled. But his eyes, they were striking, deep, unreadable, as if he carried secrets she would never understand. "Maybe I wasn't before," Emma muttered, taking another sip, "but people change." The man tilted his head, studying her. "Rough night." She let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that." For some reason, she found herself talking, the whiskey loosening the pain lodged in her chest. She told him about the engagement, the betrayal, the humiliation. She didn't know why. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because he wouldn't judge her the way the rest of the world did. The man listened, never interrupting, just watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. And then when she finished, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bar. "If you need a husband," he said casually, "I'm right here." Emma blinked, then laughed. "You?" she teased, eyes glimmering with drunken amusement. "You want to marry me?" The man smiled, a slow, lazy curve of his lips. "Why not? You need a husband. I don't have anything better to do." It was crazy, completely insane, and yet something in Emma's chest stirred. Maybe it was the alcohol, maybe it was the heartbreak, maybe it was the fact that for the first time tonight, she felt like she was in control of her own fate. So she lifted her glass in a mock toast and grinned. "All right, stranger, let's get married." Emma woke up with a pounding headache and an unsettling sense of wrongness. The sheets beneath her were not the silk ones from her penthouse. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something unfamiliar. And then she saw a cheap silver ring on her left hand. Her stomach dropped. She turned her head slowly, too scared of what she would find. And there he faced stranger from the bar, Ethan, lying next to her, shirtless, one arm draped lazily over his chest, his breathing steady. Emma gasped. What the hell had she done? She sat on the edge of the worn-out couch, staring at the peeling paint on the walls. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the small apartment. This was her new home. She still wasn't sure how it had come to this. How she had gone from silk sheets and marble floors to this tiny, cluttered space with creaky wooden floors and a kitchen barely big enough for one person. How she had gone from being Emma Lawrence, the glamorous fiancée of a wealthy businessman, to Emma, whatever her last name was now. She glanced down at the cheap silver ring on her finger, as if expecting it to vanish and take the surreal nightmare with it. But it didn't. Instead, there was movement from the small kitchenette. She turned her head and saw Ethan, her husband, the stranger she had agreed to marry in a drunken haze. He was standing by the stove, dressed in nothing but a pair of sweatpants. His back turned to her as he flipped something in a pan. The scent of buttery eggs and toast filled the apartment, making her stomach grumble before she could stop it. Ethan glanced over his shoulder, catching her staring. "Morning, wifey," he said, smirking. Emma groaned and covered her face with her hands. "I was hoping this was just a bad dream." Ethan chuckled. "Nope, it's real. You married a stranger. Congrats." Emma peeked through her fingers. "And you're completely okay with this?" He shrugged, placing the plates of scrambled eggs and toast on the tiny dining table. "I'm a man of my word. You needed a husband, I delivered." Emma exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "This is insane." Ethan slid into the chair across from her, watching her carefully. "Eat first, then we can talk about how much you regret your choices." She scowled at him but picked up her fork anyway. The reality of her situation hit hard over the next few days. She had nothing, no access to her family's money, no designer clothes, no housekeepers to clean up after her. She had to wash dishes, do laundry, and worst of all, she had to budget. She had never budgeted in her life. The first time she followed Ethan to the grocery store, she had reached for a $12 bottle of organic water, only for him to raise an eyebrow and put it back. "You're not a Lawrence anymore, princess," he said, tossing a 99-cent bottle into the cart instead. "Welcome to the real world." Emma huffed but said nothing. It was humiliating, frustrating, and yet oddly freeing. For the first time, there were no expectations, no pressure to be the perfect socialite, no judgmental eyes watching her every move. And then there was Ethan. He wasn't like the men she had known, men who threw money around, who measured worth by wealth. Ethan was different. Despite his teasing, he never let her struggle. When she burned their dinner, he just laughed and ordered takeout. When she tripped over a loose floorboard, he was there to catch her before she could hit the ground. And one rainy evening, when the power went out and she sat curled up on the couch feeling more lost than ever, Ethan simply grabbed a blanket, draped it over her shoulders, and sat beside her in silence. He didn't pity her. He just understood. And slowly, very slowly, Emma began to realize that maybe she wasn't as lost as she thought. Emma had always prided herself on her ability to read people. Growing up in high society, she had learned to recognize the subtle way someone carried themselves, the slight hesitation in their voice when they lied, the flicker of greed in their eyes when they wanted something. But Ethan didn't make sense. At first, she had accepted that he was just a regular guy, someone who lived paycheck to paycheck, someone who didn't care for luxury or extravagance. But little things didn't add up. It started with the wine. One evening, Ethan brought home a bottle of red wine, and nothing fancy, just something he had grabbed from the store. Emma, having grown up in a world where people debated over vintage versus terroir, had smirked. "Let me guess," she teased, "you're a beer guy, aren't you?" Ethan chuckled but said nothing as he poured himself a glass. Then, to her shock, he swirled the wine in his glass, examined the color under the light, took a deep inhale, and sipped it like a sommelier. Emma's brows furrowed. "What was that?" Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What was what?" "That," she gestured at his glass. "That was a proper wine tasting technique." Ethan smirked. "Maybe I just like wine." Emma narrowed her eyes. "Normal guys don't do that." Then there was the car incident. A few days later, as they walked past a luxury car dealership, she had joked, "If you could have any car in the world, what would it be?" Ethan barely hesitated. "Aston Martin DBS Superleggera," he said casually. "V12 engine, 715 horsepower, top speed of 211 miles per hour. Emma stared at him. Most guys she knew wouldn't even remember the name of that car, let alone its specs. Ethan noticed her look and shrugged. "What? I like cars." Emma let it slide, but then came the money. One evening, while Ethan was in the shower, Emma was looking for a pen in the small wooden drawer of their kitchen table when she saw a thick stack of crisp $100 bills. Her heart stopped. Ethan was broke, wasn't he? They budgeted for groceries, lived in a rundown apartment, ate takeout on special occasions. So where did this come from? She carefully picked up the stack, running her fingers over the smooth paper. It wasn't just a few bills. There had to be at least $10,000 sitting in that drawer. Before she could process it, Ethan's voice came from behind her. "Looking for something?" Emma jumped, nearly dropping the money. Ethan was leaning against the doorway, towel slung around his neck, arms crossed. She turned to him, eyes filled with confusion. "Where did this come from?" Ethan simply walked over, took the stack from her hands, and placed it back into the drawer, closing it without a word. Emma stared at him. "Ethan." He finally met her gaze, that same infuriating smirk playing on his lips. "Does it matter?" he asked. Emma blinked. "Of course it matters. We live like we can barely afford rent, but you have stacks of cash just lying around." Ethan shrugged. "I don't like wasting money." "That's not an answer." He chuckled, stepping closer. "Didn't you marry me because you loved me for who I am, not for what I have?" Emma's breath hitched. That's what she had said, that money didn't matter, that she didn't care about wealth. But now, standing in front of him, knowing there was something he wasn't telling her, she felt uneasy. Ethan lifted her chin slightly with his fingers, his voice softer now. "Trust me, Emma," he murmured. "Everything will make sense soon enough." But would it, Emma's stomach twisted. She had seen the signs the way Ethan never seemed worried about money. Despite them living in a rundown apartment, the way he casually rattled off car specifications like a collector, the way he handled wine like a seasoned sommelier, and now a hidden stash of money. A horrifying thought crept into her mind. Was Ethan involved in something illegal? The floor creaked beneath her as she shifted her weight. Ethan's head snapped up. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Ethan closed the drawer, his fingers tightening around the edge, his jaw clenched, his expression unreadable. Emma forced herself to find her voice. Where did that money come from? Ethan sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It's not what you think, Emma. Her chest tightened. Then explain it to me. Ethan hesitated for a second, and that second was enough. Are you, Emma swallowed, are you in some kind of trouble? Ethan's gaze darkened. No. Then why are you hiding stacks of cash? Her voice rose. You act like we can barely afford groceries, but you have thousands of dollars sitting in a drawer. What the hell is going on? Ethan exhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his face. Emma, just trust me. Trust you? She scoffed. How can I trust you when you keep secrets from me? Ethan's eyes flashed. I could ask you the same thing. You married me thinking I was just some poor guy, and that was fine, right? But now, the moment you see money, you assume the worst. Emma opened her mouth, but Ethan cut her off. You think I'm a criminal? He snapped. Emma flinched, guilt washing over her. She hadn't said it outright, but had she implied it? Ethan shook his head, his voice quieter now but laced with something raw. I thought you saw me for who I was, not for what I had or didn't have. Emma's throat tightened. I do, she whispered. Ethan's jaw worked, his hands curling into fists before he turned away. Then act like it, he muttered, walking out of the kitchen and leaving her standing there, more confused than ever. The next day, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing something big. Ethan had secrets, and she needed to know what they were. That afternoon, while sorting through some old books in their apartment, she found a yellowed newspaper clipping tucked between the pages. Her pulse sped up. It was an old business article dated 3 years ago, and right there in the center of the page was a photo of Ethan, or at least someone, who looked exactly like him. But the name beneath the photo wasn't Ethan. It was Ethan Alexander Reynolds. Her fingers trembled as she read the headline, Billionaire heir disappears without a trace. The mystery of Ethan Reynolds. Emma's blood ran cold. Who the hell had she married? The farmer's market was alive with color and chatter. The scent of fresh bread, ripe fruit, and roasted coffee beans lingered in the crisp morning air as Emma and Ethan moved through the bustling crowd. It had become their little Saturday ritual, walking through the market, picking up fresh produce, and bickering over whether they really needed another loaf of artisan sourdough. Emma had grown to love these mornings. There was something peaceful about them, something real. She reached for a bundle of strawberries when a voice, sharp, mocking, to familiar, cut through the air behind her. Well, look who it is. Emma froze. Slowly, she turned around, and there, standing in the middle of the market in his expensive tailored suit, was Jackson. And beside him, arm wrapped possessively around his, was Victoria. Emma's stomach twisted. Ethan, sensing the shift in her, placed a gentle hand on her lower back. Friends of yours? He asked lightly, though there was a slight edge to his voice. Emma exhaled slowly. Something like that. Jackson smirked. I have to say, Emma, I almost didn't recognize you without your designer dresses and diamond jewelry. Victoria let out a soft laugh, looking Ethan up and down with a sneer. And this must be your husband. Her tone dripped with mockery. Ethan remained silent, but Emma could feel the way his body tensed slightly beside her. Jackson crossed his arms, clearly enjoying himself. It's actually sad, really. You used to be someone, Emma, and now you're married to a man who can barely afford a decent pair of shoes. Emma's blood boiled. How dare he? Ethan had been nothing but kind to her, nothing but patient and loving. And yet Jackson, with his shallow, materialistic arrogance, had the audacity to stand there and mock him. Emma lifted her chin. At least he loves me, she said evenly, her voice steady and proud. Jackson's smirk faltered for a split second before he laughed coldly. Love? Oh, Emma, that's cute. But let's be honest, love doesn't pay the bills. Victoria leaned into him, her red lips curving into a wicked smirk. "And let's be honest, what does your husband have other than that old jacket?" Emma's fingers curled into a fist, but before she could speak, Ethan finally did. "I have enough," Ethan said smoothly. His voice was calm, unbothered, but his eyes told a different story, dark, calculating, like he was amused by something the rest of them weren't aware of. And then he smiled, a small, knowing smile, like he was holding a secret that could shake the ground they stood on. Jackson frowned slightly, as if for the first time he sensed that something wasn't quite right. Victoria, however, just scoffed. "You're delusional." But Ethan simply tilted his head, his smile never faltering, and Emma, standing beside him, couldn't shake the feeling that the game was about to change in a way Jackson and Victoria would never see coming. The apartment was quiet except for the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. Emma sat on the couch, her heart pounding, her hands trembling as she held the letter she had just found. The name on it burned into her mind: Ethan Alexander Reynolds. Not Ethan Carter, not Ethan Smith, Ethan Alexander Reynolds. She knew that name. Everyone in the business world did. The Reynolds empire was one of the most powerful conglomerates in the country, with investments in real estate, technology, and luxury brands. But 3 years ago, after a family scandal, Ethan Reynolds' sole heir had disappeared without a trace. And now he was sitting in their tiny apartment, pretending to be just an ordinary man. Emma's stomach twisted. This wasn't just a secret, this was a lie. Ethan walked through the front door a few minutes later, casually tossing his keys onto the table. He looked at her and smiled, like nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. "You're home early," he said, shrugging off his jacket. "I was thinking of making pasta tonight, unless you're craving something else." Emma didn't move. Her fingers gripped the letter so tightly that it crinkled under her touch. Finally, she spoke. "Ethan Alexander Reynolds." The words hung in the air, heavy, suffocating. Ethan's hands froze mid-motion. Slowly, his eyes lifted to hers. There was no confusion in them, no shock, just a quiet understanding. Emma swallowed hard. "That's your real name, isn't it?" Ethan exhaled softly and ran a hand through his hair, his face unreadable. "Where did you find that?" he asked, his voice calm. "That's not the point, Ethan," she snapped, standing up, her emotions spilling over. "The point is you lied to me. You let me believe you were just some regular guy when in reality you're a billionaire." He finished for her, a small smirk playing on his lips. Emma's heart twisted. "This isn't funny," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why? Why didn't you tell me?" Ethan sighed and leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Because I didn't want you to love me for my money," he said simply. Emma froze. His voice was steady, honest, raw. "You think I haven't seen it before," he continued. "People pretending to care, women who looked at me like I was a prize instead of a person." His eyes darkened. "I needed to know what it was like to be loved for who I am, not what I'm worth." Emma's breath hitched. The truth of it cut deep. She had been raised in a world where money meant everything. She had seen people marry for status, for power. And she had almost married Jackson, a man who had seen her as nothing more than a bargaining chip. Now, standing in front of her was Ethan, a man who had chosen to walk away from wealth to find something real. And he had chosen her. A tear slipped down her cheek. Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer now. "I never meant to hurt you, Emma," he murmured. "But now that you know the truth, I have to ask." He lifted a hand to gently cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away the tear. "Do you still love me?" he asked quietly. Emma's heart pounded because for the first time in her life, money didn't matter. He did. The rooftop was bathed in the golden glow of fairy lights, the soft hum of jazz playing in the background. A gentle evening breeze carried the scent of fresh roses, mixing with the warmth of candlelight that flickered on the elegantly set table. Emma stared in awe. The scene before her was breathtaking, to perfect, to unreal. She turned to Ethan, who stood beside her, his hands tucked into his pockets, watching her reaction with quiet amusement. "You did all this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan smirked. "I had some help." Emma let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. "You know, most regular guys don't have access to rooftop venues and private chefs." Ethan chuckled. Guilty as charged, He reached for her hand, leading her toward the table, pulling out a chair for her before taking his own seat across from her. The dinner was perfectilicate bites of gourmet dishes, a bottle of rich, velvety wine that Ethan expertly poured into her glass. But despite the beauty surrounding them, Emma couldn't shake the emotions swirling inside her. A part of her still struggled to bridge the gap between the Ethan she had come to love and the billionaire heir he truly was. "You're quiet," Ethan observed, watching her closely. Emma sighed, setting down her fork. "I guess I'm still processing everything." Ethan nodded as if he understood. "Because of the money?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "It's not that I care about wealth, Ethan," she said. "It's just this world of yours, the one you walked away from. It's different from mine. What if I don't fit in?" Ethan leaned forward, his eyes locking onto hers. "You think I care about any of that?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, but Ethan suddenly stood up, and then he dropped to one knee. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Ethan pulled a small velvet box from his pocket and slowly flipped it open, revealing a stunning diamond ring shimmering under the rooftop lights. Her heart pounded. "Emma," he said softly, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I don't want to just be the guy you married in a drunken moment." He took a breath, his eyes never leaving hers. "I want to be the man you choose, the man who stands beside you not because of chance, but because you want me there." Emma felt tears well up in her eyes. Ethan took her hand in his thumb gently stroking her skin. "Forget the money," he murmured. "Forget the name. I'm just Ethan. You're Ethan." A tear slipped down her cheek because deep down, she had always known he was hers. She nodded, her voice breaking. "Yes," she whispered. Ethan's face lit up, and in one swift motion, he slid the ring onto her finger before pulling her into his arms. And just like that, she wasn't lost anymore. She had found home. The grand ballroom of the Reynolds Foundation was filled with warm golden light, the sound of soft music blending with the hum of conversation. Guests moved elegantly around the room, raising glasses of champagne in celebration. But this wasn't just another high society event. This was Emma and Ethan's dream turned into reality. Their foundation dedicated to helping women who had been abandoned, mistreated, or left to rebuild their lives alone was thriving. Because Emma knew what it felt like to lose everything, and now she had a chance to give back, to offer hope to others who had once stood where she had. Ethan stood beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back, his presence grounding her as she smiled at the guests. She had never imagined her life would turn out like this, not just wealthy, but meaningful. Then, as they greeted the attendees, a familiar voice made Emma freeze. "Well, isn't this a surprise?" She turned, and there they were, Jackson and Victoria. Only they were different now. Gone was Jackson's arrogance, his confidence. His once perfectly tailored suit now looked slightly worn, the usual smirk on his face replaced with bitterness. And Victoria, who had once draped herself in luxury, stood beside him with an uneasy expression, as if the ground beneath her was no longer stable. Emma raised an eyebrow. "Jackson." Jackson forced a smile, but there was something desperate in his eyes. "You've certainly moved up in the world." Victoria scoffed. "Enjoy it while it lasts." Emma didn't react. She simply tilted her head. "I heard about Victoria's father's company. Tough luck." Ethan, who had remained silent, now finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Business is unpredictable. One wrong move and everything crumbles." Victoria's jaw clenched, and Jackson's face darkened. They had once looked down on Emma. Now they were the ones struggling to stay afloat. Emma squeezed Ethan's hand and smiled. "You know what? I think I should actually thank you, Jackson." He frowned. "For what?" "For leaving me that night," she said, her voice steady, confident. "Because if you hadn't, I wouldn't have found the best decision of my life." She turned to Ethan, her heart full. "Him." Jackson said nothing. Victoria huffed and dragged him away, disappearing into the crowd. Emma let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "Poetic justice, don't you think?" Ethan smirked. "I prefer to call it karma." The sun cast golden rays over the private beach resort, waves gently lapping at the shore. Emma sat under a large sun umbrella, watching as two little figures own boy. One girl ran toward the water, laughing as Ethan chased after them. Their twins, Oliver and Olivia. Emma's heart swelled. Once, she had lost everything, and now she had a family, a purpose, a love that had defied all odds. Ethan jogged back to her, their children giggling as they clung to his legs. He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. "Happy," he murmured. Emma smiled, reaching for his hand. More than I ever thought possible. She looked at her family, at the life they had built, and whispered, "You were the best decision I ever made." And so Emma's journey proves that sometimes life's greatest heartbreaks lead us to our most unexpected blessings. She lost everything, her wealth, her status, even her family, but in that loss, she found true love, found herself, and built a life more meaningful than she had ever imagined. Ethan had never needed his fortune to win her heart. He had only ever needed to be himself. Together, they turned pain into purpose, creating a legacy of kindness that would help countless others. And in the end, that was the greatest wealth of all. If this story touched your heart, if you found yourself smiling, crying, or holding your breath as Emma and Ethan's journey unfolded, we invite you to join our community at Whispers of the Soul. Here, we share stories that remind us of life's most beautiful truth, that sometimes our greatest blessings arrive disguised as our deepest heartbreaks. Every week, we bring you carefully crafted tales of love, resilience, and unexpected second chances. Stories that remind us that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts, but in the connections we forge and the lives we touch. Subscribe to Whispers of the Soul today and never miss another journey that might just change the way you see your own story. Because like Emma, we all deserve to find that unexpected happiness waiting just around the corner. Click the subscribe button below, turn on notifications, and become part of a community that believes in the power of storytelling to heal, inspire, and transform. Your next favorite story is waiting for you. Whispers of the Soul, where every ending is just a beautiful beginning.